In Seattle's Blackwell estate, a broke single father received a cruel $1 gift that would change everything. Charles Grand wasn't your typical charity case. For 2 years, he'd survived on double shifts while raising 8-year-old Emma alone, known for protecting his daughter's dignity at any cost. When his wealthy in-laws mockingly presented a worthless Montana cabin, he had no idea he was accepting a fortune. Charles discovered hidden paintings worth millions that would trigger a bitter legal war exposing family secrets about love, betrayal, and what wealth truly means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Charles's hand tightened on Emma's as they approached the Blackwell estate's front entrance. The iron gates had swung open automatically, recognizing the car service vehicle, because of course they did. Everything about this place operated with the kind of seamless efficiency that only serious money could buy. "Daddy, why are the lions looking at me?" Emma's voice carried the uncertain edge of a child trying to sound brave. Charles glanced at the stone sculptures flanking the driveway. Each one probably cost more than he made in a year. "They're just statues, sweetheart. They can't hurt you." But the real lions waited inside. The estate sprawled before them like something from a magazine spread Sarah used to flip through wistfully during their early days together. White columns, manicured lawns that looked painted rather than grown, windows that caught the Seattle afternoon light and threw it back with aristocratic indifference. Charles had been here exactly 3 times. Once when Sarah had nervously introduced him to her family, the art school dropout dating their Ivy League daughter. Once for their small, awkward wedding reception that Victoria had orchestrated with the enthusiasm of someone planning a funeral. And once 2 years ago, when they'd buried Sarah and the Blackwells had made it abundantly clear that Charles's presence was tolerated only because Emma needed a parent. "Remember what we talked about?" Charles knelt to Emma's level, adjusting the collar of her dress. The nicest one she owned, bought from a consignment shop and still a world away from what her cousins would be wearing. Emma nodded solemnly. "Be polite. Don't touch anything. Stay close to you. That's my girl." He kissed her forehead, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, the cheap bottle that claimed to be the same brand Sarah had used, though it never quite smelled right. The front door opened before they reached it. James Blackwell stood in the entrance, his tailored suit fitting him the way expensive clothes always did, as if they'd been born to his body rather than purchased. Sarah's younger brother. The man who'd been Charles's groomsman and then, gradually, someone who returned fewer and fewer calls. "Charles. Emma." James's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everyone's in the conservatory." Of course they were, because normal families had living rooms, but the Blackwells had a conservatory. Emma's hand tightened in Charles's as they followed James through hallways lined with art that probably had insurance policies thicker than Charles's entire financial history. The marble floors clicked under their shoes. Somewhere in the house, classical music played. Live, not recorded. Because Victoria believed recorded music was pedestrian. The conservatory opened before them like a stage set. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked gardens where someone was probably paid full-time just to make sure the roses bloomed in perfect formation. The room held perhaps 20 people, all dressed in variations of expensive casual, the kind of understated wealth that required knowing exactly which brands signaled belonging. Victoria Blackwell stood at the room's center, holding court. 73 years old, and she carried herself like visiting royalty. Her silver hair was swept into a style that probably had a French name. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists. Not ostentatious, just enough to remind everyone that she could afford to wear a down payment's worth of jewelry to a family gathering. Her eyes found Charles immediately. Something cold flickered in that gaze, like sunlight on ice. "Charles. Emma. How good of you to join us." Victoria's voice carried that particular quality of warmth that was really frost pretending to be fire. "Come, we have matters to discuss." Emma pressed against Charles's side. Around them, conversations had quieted. Sarah's cousins watched with the kind of polite interest people showed at zoos. Their children, Emma's second cousins, clustered near a grand piano, their laughter suddenly muted. Charles recognized this feeling. He'd felt it the first time he'd walked into Sarah's family home, wearing his best thrift store blazer while everyone else wore casual clothes that cost more. He'd felt it at their wedding, when Victoria had made sure the photographer captured more shots of the venue than the couple. He'd felt it at Sarah's funeral, when Victoria had taken Emma from his arms and held her like Charles was a stranger rather than the man who'd sat by Sarah's hospital bed for 3 months, watching cancer steal her piece by piece. "Please sit." Victoria gestured to a chair positioned in a way that put Charles's back to most of the room. A calculated placement. She'd probably spent time arranging the furniture. Charles remained standing. "We won't be staying long. Emma has homework. This won't take much time." Victoria smiled, and Charles remembered Sarah once saying her mother's smile was like a weapon she'd learned to sharpen. "James, would you bring the documents?" James moved to a side table where a leather folder rested. His movements were careful, measured. He wouldn't meet Charles's eyes. "As you know," Victoria began, her voice projecting slightly, performing for the room. "After Sarah's passing, there were certain obligations to fulfill. Family matters that required proper handling." Charles's jaw tightened. Sarah had been gone for 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. He marked time that way now in the calendar of her absence. "My great-uncle Henry, a rather eccentric member of the family, passed away some years ago. He left behind property in Montana. Very remote. Quite worthless, really." Victoria paused, letting the word land. "The family has decided this property should transfer to you." Someone near the windows laughed, quickly stifled, but Charles heard it. James approached, holding the folder like it contained something distasteful. "It's all been properly documented. The deed, transfer papers. Everything's legal." "How generous," Charles said quietly. Victoria's smile widened. "We thought so. Of course, the property has no real value. The structure is practically condemned. But it seemed appropriate that you should have something." The way she said something made it clear she meant nothing. James opened the folder. Charles caught sight of official-looking documents, property photos showing a dilapidated cabin that looked like a strong wind might finish what time had started. And there, on the first page of the deed, a line that made several people in the room chuckle. "Assessed value $1. $1. Victoria announced, her voice carrying. "For tax purposes, you understand. Though honestly, that might be generous." The room had fallen into that particular kind of cruel amusement that comes from watching someone else's humiliation. Not loud laughter, the Blackwells were too refined for that. But smirks, knowing glances, the kind of mockery that happened in silence. Charles knelt beside Emma, blocking her view of the room. "They're not laughing at anything important, sweetheart." But they were. They were laughing at the poor man who'd married above his station and was now receiving his proper reward. $1 worth of Montana wilderness that nobody wanted. Victoria stepped closer, the deed extended like a challenge. "Of course, if you'd prefer not to accept, I'll take it." The words came out harder than Charles intended. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Really? Charles, be reasonable. The property is worthless. The cost of demolishing the structure alone would exceed any possible value." "I said I'll take it." Charles stood, taking the folder from James. Their eyes met for a moment. James looked away first, something that might have been shame flickering across his features. Around them, the room had gone silent. Victoria's expression shifted. Annoyance crossed with something that might have been confusion. She'd expected him to refuse. Expected the humiliation to be complete when he walked away from even their dollar gift. "Very well." Victoria's voice could have frozen water. "James will handle the paperwork. I trust you can see yourselves out?" It wasn't a question. Charles took Emma's hand. The folder felt heavy under his arm, weighted with more than paper. As they turned toward the door, Emma looked up at her grandmother. "Grandma Victoria?" Her voice carried in the quiet room. "Why are you being mean to Daddy?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria's face remained composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Something that looked almost like guilt before it hardened into ice. "Emma, sweetie, Charles started. No. Victoria cut him off. Her attention fixed on Emma with an intensity that made Charles's protective instincts flare. Your father made certain choices, child. He chose to take my daughter away from her family, from her future. He chose poverty over the life she deserved. And when she became ill, that's enough. Charles's voice came out low, dangerous. Emma, we're leaving. When she became ill, Victoria continued, her voice rising. She might have had access to better treatment, better doctors, if she hadn't been struggling to make ends meet in that tiny apartment. I said that's enough. Charles's shout startled even himself. Emma flinched against his side. The room had gone deadly silent. Victoria stood frozen, her hand raised as if to make another point. But something in Charles's expression must have stopped her. For just a moment, he let her see the rage he usually kept buried, the fury at being blamed for a cancer that no amount of money could have stopped, at being treated like he'd been Sarah's greatest mistake instead of the person who'd loved her most. James stepped forward. Mother, perhaps. Get out. Victoria's voice was quiet now, but no less cutting. Take your dollar cabin and get out of my house. Charles didn't need to be told twice. He scooped Emma into his arms. She was getting too big for this, but he needed to feel her weight, needed the reminder of what mattered, and walked toward the exit. Behind them, conversation slowly resumed, whispers like wasps. James followed them to the door. In the foyer, away from the others, he caught Charles's arm. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She hasn't been the same since Sarah died. Charles looked at the man who'd once been something like a friend. None of us have. The cabin, it really is worthless, Charles. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I don't want you to waste money trying to make something of it. I appreciate the concern. Charles's voice was flat. James released his arm, something complicated passing across his face. If you need anything, we won't. Charles adjusted Emma in his arms. She'd buried her face against his shoulder, and he could feel dampness soaking through his shirt. She was crying silently, the way she'd learned to do in the months after Sarah died. Tell your mother we'll be just fine with our dollar gift. Outside, the afternoon had shifted toward evening. The car service was waiting. Charles had splurged on that, knowing he'd need a clean exit. As the gates closed behind them, Emma finally spoke. I don't like it there. I know, baby. We won't go back. Promise. Charles thought about the deed in the folder beside him. About Victoria's face when he'd accepted instead of refusing. About the way the whole room had watched him like he was entertainment instead of family. Promise. In the back seat, as Seattle spread around them in shades of gray and rain, Charles opened the folder. The cabin photos showed a structure barely standing, surrounded by wilderness. Remote, isolated, probably unsalvageable. But it was his. Legally, officially his. They could mock the value, laugh at the gift, treat it like a joke. But Victoria had signed the deed. James had witnessed it. And Charles had something the Blackwells hadn't intended to give him. Freedom. Not from poverty. This cabin wouldn't solve anything practical. But freedom from ever having to stand in that conservatory again. Ever having to watch his daughter shrink under the weight of their contempt. Emma had fallen asleep against him by the time they reached their apartment building. Charles carried her up 3 flights. The elevator had been broken for a month. Past peeling paint and doors that leaked cooking smells. Their apartment was on the top floor. 600 square feet that Sarah had tried to make feel like home with secondhand furniture and plants that never quite thrived in the Seattle gloom. He laid Emma on her bed. Really just a mattress on a frame they'd found curbside, and pulled her blanket up. The stuffed bear Sarah had given her for her 6th birthday was tucked under one arm. Emma's face was peaceful in sleep, no longer showing the stress of the afternoon. In the main room, living room, dining room, and kitchen all sharing the same space, Charles spread the cabin documents on their scratch table. He studied the property photos under the flickering fluorescent light that kept threatening to die completely. The cabin was worse than he'd thought. Roof partially collapsed, windows broken or missing entirely, with siding weathered to gray. The surrounding land was marked as 2. 3 acres, all wilderness. But there was something in the photos that Victoria hadn't mentioned. Something Charles's designers eye caught even in the poor quality images. The cabin had bones. Beneath the decay there was structure, craftsmanship, the kind of attention to detail that spoke of someone who'd built with care, not just utility. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory from one of their early dates when he'd taken her to his favorite art supply store because he couldn't afford fancy restaurants. You see things other people miss. That's what I love about you. You find value in the overlooked. Charles's phone buzzed. A text from the warehouse where he worked nights. Can you pick up Jenkins's shift tomorrow? Double overtime. He needed the money. Emma's school had sent another reminder about unpaid fees. The rent was due next week and he was short. The freelance design work he picked up when he could wasn't enough to cover the gaps. But staring at the cabin photos, something stirred in Charles's chest. Something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Possibility. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe the cabin was worthless. Maybe accepting it was the joke they'd all thought it was. Or maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what he and Emma needed. A place away from the city that cost too much, where every corner reminded him of Sarah. A place where Emma wouldn't be the poor kid. A place that was theirs, bought with nothing but Victoria's contempt and Charles's refusal to be broken. He pulled out his laptop. 5 years old, held together with tape and stubbornness, and searched for information about the Montana property. About cost of living. About what it would take to make a worthless cabin into something livable. Outside, Seattle rain began to fall. Inside, Charles studied the photos until his eyes burned, until the numbers started to blur together, until he could almost hear Sarah's voice. Don't let them make you feel small. The cabin was worth $1. But maybe Charles was worth more than the Blackwells could understand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe they just handed him the one thing they couldn't buy, a chance to start over on his own terms. Charles's hand trembled slightly as he set the eviction notice on the kitchen table. The paper seemed to mock him with its official letterhead, the words blurring together. Final notice. 30 days. Legal action. Emma was at school. He had 3 hours before he needed to pick her up. 3 hours to figure out how to tell an 8-year-old that they might be homeless by the end of the month. The rent had increased again. $200 more than he could manage, even with the warehouse job and whatever freelance design work he could scrape together. Seattle was pricing him out, block by block, rent increase by rent increase. His phone buzzed. Becca Martinez's name flashed on the screen. Don't tell me you're canceling lunch, she said before he could speak. Because I'm already at your door. Charles opened it to find his best friend holding 2 paper bags. The smell of Thai food, Sarah's favorite, hit him like a memory. You look like hell, Becca observed, pushing past him into the apartment. Her scrubs were wrinkled from a night shift at the ER, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. She'd been Sarah's roommate in college, had introduced them at a campus art show. She'd held Charles together when Sarah died, and she wasn't about to let him fall apart now. Rough morning. Charles gestured to the eviction notice. Becca's expression hardened as she read it. Those bastards. This is the 3rd increase in 2 years. 4th. Charles collapsed into a chair that Sarah had reupholstered before she got sick. The fabric was wearing through again. Everything was wearing through. I can't keep up, Becca. Even if I pick up every extra shift, even if I land 3 freelance projects, the math doesn't work. She set the food aside, her nurse's practicality taking over. What about moving? There are cheaper neighborhoods. I've looked. Anything affordable is too far from Emma's school, and I can't pull her out. She's finally doing okay there. She has friends. After Sarah. His voice caught. I can't take that from her too. Becca's hand covered his. So what are you going to do? Charles pulled out the folder from the Blackwell gathering. He'd been studying it obsessively for 3 days. The cabin photos spread across every surface. This is going to sound crazy. Try me. I work in an ER. Nothing sounds crazy anymore. Montana. He opened the folder, showing her the property documents. The cabin Victoria gave me. I've been researching. Cost of living there is half what it is here. Maybe less. Becca stared at him. Charles, that cabin is barely standing. I know, but the land is solid. There's a town 20 miles away, Whitefish. Small, but it has schools, services. I could fix up the cabin, maybe find work. With what money? Becca's voice was gentle but firm. Repairs would cost thousands. You'd need tools, materials, permits probably. And what about Emma's life here? Her friends, her school, her therapist? The words hit like physical blows because they were all true. But Charles had spent 3 sleepless nights running every other option through his mind, and they all ended the same way. Failure. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Their first apartment, barely bigger than this one. Sarah spreading paint samples on the wall, her face bright with possibility. We'll make it beautiful, she'd said. We'll make it ours. That's what matters, not the size or the cost, but that it's ours. They'd painted those walls themselves, chosen each piece of furniture carefully. Sarah had a gift for making small spaces feel like sanctuaries. She'd believed they could build something meaningful from nothing. Sarah always said the cabin was special, Charles said quietly. When she'd talk about her childhood, which wasn't often, she'd mention her great-uncle Henry, said he was different from the rest of them, that he understood things they didn't. Becca was quiet for a moment. She never mentioned inheriting it. She didn't know. Henry died 5 years ago, and the family handled everything. But she talked about visiting him there when she was young, before Victoria found out and stopped it. Charles pulled out one photo, the cabin from a distance, surrounded by pine trees and mountains. Despite its decay, something about the setting called to him. She said it was the only place in her family's world that felt real. Real doesn't pay for Emma's school supplies. Becca pulled out her laptop. But let's look anyway. Show me what you found. They spent the next hour researching together. Becca's practical mind cut through Charles's desperate optimism, but she didn't dismiss it entirely. The numbers were stark. Whitefish had work available, seasonal tourism jobs that paid decent wages. Housing costs were manageable. The school system had good ratings. You'd be starting over completely, Becca said. No support system, no safety net. I don't have a safety net here either. Charles gestured around the apartment. I have you, and I'm grateful for that. But otherwise, this city is eating me alive. Becca. Every month I fall further behind. Every bill is a crisis. Emma deserves better than watching her father drown. Becca's phone rang. She glanced at it, silenced the call. My shift starts in 2 hours. Let me think about this, okay? Don't make any decisions yet. But as she spoke, Charles's phone buzzed with an email notification. He opened it, his stomach sinking as he read. What? Becca caught his expression. Client canceling. The logo redesign I've been working on for 3 weeks. Charles set the phone down carefully, afraid he might throw it. They're going with someone else. That was $800 I was counting on. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Through the window, Seattle spread out in its perpetual gray, beautiful and unaffordable. A city that had stopped having room for people like him. Becca studied him for a long moment. You're actually serious about this? I think I have to be. She nodded slowly, then opened a new browser window. Okay, then let's figure out how to do it smart. First, you need to see the property in person. No decisions until you've actually been there. I can't afford. I'll cover the flight. Consider it Emma's birthday present early. Becca held up a hand, stopping his protest. Sarah would haunt me if I didn't help. Besides, you need to know what you're actually dealing with before you uproot your daughter's life. Charles felt something loosen in his chest. Not hope exactly, he'd learned to be suspicious of hope. But possibility. The same feeling he'd had staring at the cabin photos late at night. Just a scouting trip, Becca continued. Weekend. I'll watch Emma. You fly out, look at the property, talk to locals. Come back with actual information instead of desperate dreams. When did you become the voice of reason? Someone has to be. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I don't want you to go, Charles. Selfishly, I want you to stay here where I can keep an eye on you both. But I also know that look on your face. You've already decided. I'm just trying to make sure you don't rush into disaster. They spent another hour planning. Becca found cheap flights, a red-eye that would get him to Montana Friday night, back Sunday afternoon. Charles could visit the property Saturday, ask questions, assess realistically what he'd be taking on. As Becca left for her shift, she paused at the door. Sarah loved that cabin, or the idea of it. She told me once that her great-uncle was the only Blackwell who understood that some things mattered more than money. She never told me that. She didn't tell you a lot about her family. I think it hurt too much. Becca's expression softened. But she also said that when she had kids, she wanted to take them there. Wanted them to see that her family wasn't all Victoria's poison. That there was good somewhere in her bloodline. After she left, Charles stood at the window watching rain streak the glass. Somewhere out there, Emma was in class, probably drawing in the margins of her math homework like Sarah used to do. Tomorrow he'd have to tell her about the eviction, start preparing her for whatever came next. But tonight, he had a plane ticket and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Montana was 2 time zones and 1,000 miles away. The cabin might be worthless. The whole trip might be a waste of money and time. But Charles had learned something in the 2 years since Sarah died. Sometimes the only way forward was to take the leap that terrified you most. He booked the flight before he could change his mind. Charles's rental car rattled over the dirt road, each pothole jarring his already frayed nerves. The GPS had given up miles ago, leaving him with handwritten directions from the local gas station attendant. Follow the pine markers, she'd said. Can't miss it. He'd missed it twice. When the cabin finally appeared through the trees, Charles's stomach dropped. The photos hadn't lied, but they'd been merciful. The reality was worse. The structure sagged like a dying animal. Roof shingles littered the ground. Windows gaped empty, glass long since shattered. The porch had partially collapsed, wood gray with rot. Vegetation had reclaimed the clearing, wild and indifferent. Charles sat in the car, engine running, staring at his supposed inheritance. Victoria's cruelty suddenly felt absolute. This wasn't just worthless, it was a monument to contempt. You look lost. Charles jerked around. An older man stood beside the car, appearing from nowhere with the ease of someone who belonged to this landscape. Indigenous features, weathered skin, eyes that assessed without judgment. He wore work clothes and carried a toolbox. Tommy Whitehorse, the man said. I live about a mile that way. He gestured vaguely north. Used to check on this place for old Henry. Figured someone would show up eventually. Charles Grand. He climbed out, extending his hand. Tommy's grip was firm, calloused. I inherited this situation. Tommy's laugh was warm, unexpected. Henry would have appreciated that description. He called it his monument to impracticality. His expression softened. You're Sarah's husband. I'm sorry for your loss. Henry talked about her. Said she was the only one in that family worth knowing. Something in Charles's chest tightened. You knew him? 40 years, give or take. Good man. Artist at heart, though he'd deny it. Tommy studied the cabin. This place meant something to him, more than the family understood. They walked the property together, Tommy pointing out structural issues with professional efficiency. Foundation solid. Frame salvageable. Everything else disaster. Why would he keep this place? Charles asked. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Henry believed some things were worth preserving even when nobody else saw their value. Said beauty didn't need an audience to exist. Inside, the cabin was worse. Water damage. Animal nests. Debris everywhere. Charles felt his Montana dream crumbling with each step. Then he saw the wall. The interior paneling had buckled, pulling away from the frame. Through the gap, something caught the light. A corner of wrapped canvas. What's that? Charles moved closer. Tommy's expression shifted. I'll be damned. Charles pulled gently. The panel came away easily, revealing a space behind the wall. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and secured with twine, were packages. Dozens of them. His hands shook as he unwrapped the first one. The painting emerged like a revelation. Oil on canvas, pristine despite decades hidden. A landscape, mountains at sunset, rendered with skill that made Charles's designer eye recognize mastery. Tommy. His voice barely worked. What is this? Tommy had gone very still. Open another one. Charles did. Another landscape, then another. Each one perfect, and signed, hidden deliberately behind these walls. Henry collected art, Tommy said slowly. But these. I never knew about these. Charles found a note tucked with one painting, handwriting faded but legible. For those who see value beyond price. His phone had no signal. The paintings surrounded them, silent witnesses to a secret kept for decades. We need an expert, Charles whispered. Tommy nodded. We need a lot of things. But first, we need to secure this place. If these are what I think they are. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Charles stared at the paintings. His worthless inheritance suddenly transformed into something he couldn't begin to comprehend. Victoria had given him a joke. Henry had left him a fortune. Charles hadn't slept. The red-eye back to Seattle felt like a fever dream, his mind replaying the discovery in endless loops. Wrapped paintings. Tommy's stunned expression. The note in Henry's handwriting. For those who see value beyond price. Emma was still asleep when he arrived home Sunday morning. Becca sat at his kitchen table, coffee in hand, waiting. Well, she studied his face. That bad? I don't know. Charles dropped into a chair, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. It might be nothing, or it might be. He pulled out his phone, showed her the photos he'd taken. Painting after painting, each one carefully documented. Becca's eyes widened. Charles, these look. I know. His hands were shaking again. The same tremor that had started in the cabin and hadn't stopped. I need an expert. Someone who can tell me if I'm crazy or if Henry Blackwell actually hid a collection worth. He couldn't finish the sentence. Saying it out loud felt like tempting fate. Becca was already on her laptop. You still have contacts from design school? Anyone who went into art history? Charles thought back. Most of his classmates had disappeared into comfortable careers while he dropped out to care for Sarah. But there was one name, Professor Chun, who'd always said Charles had a good eye, who'd been disappointed when he left. I can reach out. Charles pulled up his old university email, fingers hesitant over the keyboard. But this feels insane. The Blackwells gave me a worthless cabin. Why would there be millions in art hidden inside? Maybe they didn't know. Becca's practical mind was already working. You said Henry was estranged from the family. Maybe he hid them deliberately. The email to Professor Chun took Charles 20 minutes to write, deleting and rewriting, trying to sound professional rather than desperate. He attached the photos, hit send before he could overthink it. The response came 30 minutes later. Charles, holy hell, where did you find these? Call me immediately. I'm forwarding to a colleague in authentication. Don't touch them. Don't move them. Don't tell anyone else about this until we talk. Chun A phone number followed. Charles's hands shook as he dialed. Professor Chun answered on the first ring, and for the next hour, Charles explained everything. The cabin, the discovery, the hidden space behind the walls. I'm sending someone, Chun said finally. Dr. Adrian Foster. British, works for a major auction house, but he's got academic integrity. If anyone can authenticate these, it's him. He'll be skeptical, he has to be. But Charles, if these are what I think they are. What do you think they are? A long pause. Theodore Winthrop Morrison. 19th century landscape artist. Reclusive. Most of his work was thought destroyed in a fire in 1891. If even one of these is authentic. Chen's voice caught. Charles, you need a lawyer. You need security. You need to understand that if this is real, your life is about to change dramatically. After the call ended, Charles sat in silence. Emma emerged from her room, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Daddy? You're home." She climbed into his lap, still small enough for this, though growing every day. "Did you see the cabin?" "I did, sweetheart." "Was it nice?" Charles thought about the sagging roof, the collapsed porch, the years of neglect. Then he thought about what lay hidden behind those walls. It was full of surprises. Dr. Adrian Foster arrived in Montana 3 days later. Charles had used his last credit card to fly back, leaving Emma with Becca and a promise to explain everything soon. Foster was everything Professor Chun had described: meticulous, skeptical, British to his bones. He approached the paintings like a surgeon, each movement precise and documented. Tommy watched from the doorway as Foster examined the first piece under specialized lighting he'd brought. "The canvas is period appropriate," Foster murmured, more to himself than them. "Pigments consistent with 1880s composition. Technique matches Morrison's documented style, the way he layered colors, the brushwork on the mountains." He moved to another painting, then another. His skepticism slowly transformed into something else: wonder. Excitement barely contained beneath professional composure. "Mr. Grand." Foster finally looked up, his expression grave. "These need full laboratory analysis, provenance research, documentation, but preliminary assessment." He paused, choosing words carefully. "I believe you've discovered the lost Morrison collection. Works thought destroyed over a century ago." "How much?" Charles's voice came out hoarse. Foster studied him for a long moment. "Conservative estimate? 15 to 20 million. Possibly more at auction." The cabin suddenly felt too small. Charles's vision blurred at the edges. 20 million, he repeated stupidly. "Perhaps more." Foster's British reserve cracked slightly. "Mr. Grand, this is an unprecedented discovery. The art world will be—" He seemed to search for words, stunned. Tommy spoke from the doorway, his voice quiet. "Henry always said some things were worth more than money. Guess he proved it." Charles thought about the eviction notice on his kitchen table, about Emma's unpaid school fees, about 2 years of drowning slowly in debt while Victoria Blackwell had handed him this cabin like a joke. He thought about Sarah, who'd loved her great-uncle Henry, who'd always said he was different, and he started to laugh, then cry, then both at once, while Tommy's steady hand gripped his shoulder and Dr. Foster politely looked away, giving him this moment of transformation. His life had just changed, but Charles had no idea that the real battle was only beginning. The news broke on a Wednesday morning. Charles was making Emma breakfast when his phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, emails, calls from numbers he didn't recognize. "Lost Morrison collection found in Montana cabin." The headline scrolled across his screen, accompanied by photos Foster must have released to the Art Authentication Board. Within an hour, every major news outlet had picked up the story. By noon, a black Mercedes sat outside his apartment building. The knock came precise and official. Charles opened the door to find a man in a suit that probably cost more than Charles's monthly rent. "Mr. Grand, I'm Robert Hutchins, attorney for the Blackwell family." He extended a business card. "I think we need to talk." Charles's stomach dropped. "I'm not interested in—" The paintings were not meant to be included in the property transfer. Hutchins's voice carried practiced authority. The deed specified structures and land. Valuable contents were never discussed or intended as part of the inheritance. The deed says, "all structures and contents." Charles had memorized every word. "A technicality will be challenging." Hutchins smiled without warmth. "The Blackwell family is prepared to be reasonable. Return the paintings, and we'll compensate you fairly for your trouble." "They're mine legally, Mr. Grand." Hutchins's tone shifted, revealing steel beneath politeness. "The Blackwell family has extensive legal resources. This can be easy or it can be very difficult. I suggest you consider your daughter's well-being before making rash decisions." The implied threat hung in the air. Charles felt rage building, hot and dangerous. "Get out. You'll be hearing from us." Hutchins left his card on the table. "I'd suggest finding legal representation." You're going to need it. Through the window, Charles watched the Mercedes pull away. His phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. A link to the local news. Victoria Blackwell filled the screen, perfectly composed, speaking to reporters outside her estate. These paintings are family heirlooms, hidden by my eccentric uncle. My daughter's widower has taken advantage of a generous gift to claim items that were never meant to be transferred. We'll be seeking their immediate return through legal channels. Her performance was flawless, the grieving mother, the wronged family matriarch. Charles's phone rang. James Blackwell's name appeared. Charles, please. James's voice was strained. Just talk to Mother. We can work something out. The paintings belong to the family. I'm Sarah's family. Charles's voice was ice. Emma is your family. Or did you forget that? That's not fair. Mother's just trying to. Your mother gave me that cabin as a joke, James. You were there. You watched everyone laugh. Silence. Then, just be reasonable. You can't win this fight. Charles ended the call. Outside, a news van had pulled up. A reporter was setting up a camera. Emma emerged from her room, eyes wide. Daddy, why are there people outside? Charles knelt beside her, his hands steady despite everything. Remember the cabin Grandma Victoria gave us? Turns out it had something special inside. And now some people want to take it away. Can they? Charles thought about Victoria's resources, her lawyers, her connections. He thought about fighting people who could afford to bury him in legal fees. Then he thought about Sarah's journal entries, about Henry's note, about 2 years of being treated like he wasn't worthy of basic respect. Not if I have anything to say about it. His phone buzzed. Becca, turn on the news. It's everywhere. Another message. I'm coming over. Don't talk to anyone until I get there. But it was too late for silence. The story was already spinning out of control, and Charles was at the center of a storm that was only beginning to break. The Montana law office of Diane Reeves didn't look like much. Single-story building on Whitefish's Main Street, sandwiched between a coffee shop and a hardware store. The sign in the window was weathered, the paint fading. Charles hesitated before entering. Tommy had recommended her, said she was the best lawyer in 3 counties. But looking at the modest office, Charles felt doubt creeping in. The Blackwells would bring corporate attorneys, teams of them, with resources that could overwhelm someone working out of a small-town practice. Inside, the office was neat but cramped. Legal books lined the walls. A desk held organized stacks of folders. And behind that desk sat a woman in her mid-50s, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose, studying documents with the focus of a surgeon. She looked up as Charles entered. Mr. Grand, right on time. Her voice carried authority despite its plainness. Tommy told me about your situation. Sit. It wasn't a request. Charles sat. Diane Reeves studied him the way a mechanic might study a damaged engine, assessing what she had to work with. I've reviewed the deed, the transfer documents, and the news coverage. She pushed the papers toward him. The Blackwells filed their lawsuit this morning. Fraud, undue influence, claim that valuable contents weren't meant to be included in the transfer. I didn't even know the paintings existed when I accepted the deed. I know. That's our strongest defense. Diane leaned back, still watching him. But understand something, Mr. Grand. The Blackwells aren't interested in truth. They're interested in winning. They'll use every resource they have, media manipulation, legal pressure, character assassination. They'll paint you as an opportunist who took advantage of a grieving family. That's not. I know it's not true, but truth and perception are different things in court. She pulled out another folder. I need to know everything. Your relationship with Sarah. The family dynamics. Why Victoria Blackwell gave you this cabin in the first place. For the next 2 hours, Charles talked. About meeting Sarah at community college. About the Blackwell's contempt for his working-class background. About Sarah's illness and Victoria's blame. About the humiliating gathering where the cabin had been presented like a punchline. Diane listened without interruption, taking notes with quick, efficient movements. Victoria blamed you for Sarah's death, she said finally. That's important. It establishes motive for the transfer. She wanted to humiliate you, give you something worthless as a final insult. She couldn't have known about the paintings. How does that help us? Because their lawsuit claims the transfer was conditional, that valuable items were never meant to be included. But if Victoria didn't know the paintings existed, she couldn't have intended to withhold them. Diane's smile was sharp. We prove she gave you that cabin out of spite, expecting it to be worthless. The paintings being there is an accident, but a legal accident that benefits you. Charles felt the first stirring of hope. Can we win? Depends. Diane pulled out more papers. The deed language is clear, all structures and contents. That's in our favor. Your documented ignorance of the paintings eliminates fraud claims. But the Blackwells will argue family intention, claim that Henry Blackwell never meant for the art to leave family hands. How do we counter that? We establish Henry's character and his estrangement from the family. We show he deliberately hid these paintings, that he had reasons for wanting them away from Victoria's control. Diane made a note. Tommy knew Henry. His testimony will be crucial. Over the next week, Diane built their defense with methodical precision. She interviewed Tommy, who described Henry as principled and disgusted by his family's values. She collected documentation of the property transfer, establishing every detail of that humiliating gathering. The Blackwells are claiming you manipulated the situation, Diane explained during one meeting. We need to show the opposite, that you were the victim of their cruelty, that accepting the cabin was an act of dignity, not calculation. Charles discovered more evidence in Sarah's belongings, journal entries he'd been too heartbroken to read before. Sarah had written about her great-uncle Henry, about childhood visits to the cabin before Victoria forbade them. Uncle Henry is different from the others. He believes art should be appreciated, not owned. He says beauty exists whether anyone claims it or not. Mother hates him for refusing to sell his land for development. Says he's wasting family resources on sentiment. Another entry, dated 3 months before her death. I told Uncle Henry about Charles yesterday. He said anyone who could see the value in me instead of my family's money was worth knowing. He made me promise something, but I'm too tired to write it all down. Something about the cabin. About making sure it goes to someone who understands. Diane read the entries carefully. This suggests Henry knew about Charles, that he approved of Sarah's choice. But his will didn't mention me. Because Victoria contested it, according to James. Diane's expression hardened. We need to subpoena probate records. If Victoria suppressed parts of Henry's will that mention Sarah or the cabin, it undermines their entire case. Dr. Foster completed his authentication, confirming all 37 paintings were genuine Morrisons. His official report estimated their value at $18 million. The number still didn't feel real. Charles struggled with mounting anxiety about legal costs until Diane made an offer. I'll work on contingency. 30% if we win, nothing if we lose. Why? Charles asked. You don't know me. This case could take months. Diane was quiet for a moment. I used to work for firms that represented families like the Blackwells. I watched them crush good people who couldn't afford proper defense. I lost a case once. A family that deserved to win but couldn't match the resources thrown against them. Her eyes met his. I swore I'd use my skills differently. Your case isn't just about paintings, Mr. Grand. It's about whether wealth can simply take what it wants because it has the power to do so. A deposition was scheduled. Charles would have to face Victoria directly, answer questions under oath while Blackwell attorneys tried to dismantle his credibility. Diane prepared him with the efficiency of a general preparing troops. They'll try to provoke you, make you angry, show emotion that plays badly on camera. Stay calm. Answer truthfully but precisely. Don't volunteer information. The night before the deposition, an envelope arrived at Charles's Seattle apartment. No return address, postmarked from California. Inside were old photographs, Henry Blackwell with a young Sarah at the Montana cabin. Sarah couldn't have been more than 10, smiling at the camera with genuine joy Charles had rarely seen in pictures from her childhood. A note accompanied them, handwritten on expensive stationery. He wanted her to have it. Now you must finish what she couldn't. No signature. Charles stared at the photographs, at Sarah's young face full of hope, at Henry Blackwell, who looked nothing like Victoria. His expression open where hers was closed, warm where hers was ice. Tomorrow he'd face the Blackwells in a conference room, surrounded by their lawyers and their power. But tonight, he had proof that someone in that family had seen value in Sarah beyond her last name. And that same person had left Charles something more precious than paintings, a chance to prove the Blackwells couldn't buy their way out of accountability. The conference room felt designed for intimidation. Polished mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle. Leather chairs that probably cost more than Charles's monthly rent. For Blackwell attorneys occupied one side, their matching suits and synchronized movements suggesting military precision. Victoria sat at the center, perfectly composed. Cream suit, pearl necklace, her expression serene, as if this were a board meeting rather than a legal battle over $18 million. James sat beside her, avoiding Charles's eyes. Diane occupied the chair next to Charles, her weathered briefcase and off-the-rack suit standing in stark contrast to the Blackwell team's polish. But her expression was calm, almost amused, as if she knew something they didn't. Let's begin. Robert Hutchins, Victoria's lead attorney, activated the recording device. Mrs. Blackwell, please state your relationship to the property in question. Victoria's voice was measured, controlled. The cabin belonged to my great-uncle Henry Blackwell. When he passed, the property came to me as his closest living relative. I maintained it out of family obligation, though it had no practical value. And why did you transfer this property to Mr. Grand? My daughter Sarah had been married to Charles for 7 years before her death. Victoria's pause was calculated. Despite my reservations about the marriage, I felt obligated to provide something for him. The cabin seemed appropriate, remote, inexpensive to maintain. I thought it might serve as a retreat. Charles's jaw tightened. The lie was delivered so smoothly, rewriting the humiliation of that gathering into an act of generosity. Were you aware of valuable items stored at the property? Absolutely not. Had I known Henry had hidden artwork there, family heirlooms of significant value, I would never have included them in the transfer. The deed specified structures and land. We assumed the cabin was empty except for worthless furniture. Diane made a note, her expression unchanged. Hutchins continued. Describe your relationship with Mr. Grand. Victoria's mask slipped slightly. Cordial, considering the circumstances. Charles came from a very different background than our family. Sarah's choice to marry him was difficult, but I accepted it for her sake. Did you blame Mr. Grand for your daughter's illness? Objection. Diane's voice cut through. Relevance. It establishes Mrs. Blackwell's state of mind during the property transfer, Hutchins countered. The mediator nodded. Answer the question, Mrs. Blackwell. Victoria's composure cracked, just barely. Sarah struggled financially throughout her marriage. The stress of poverty, of working multiple jobs while ill. I believe it contributed to her decline. Charles refused to accept help from our family. His pride prevented Sarah from accessing better care. Charles felt the words like physical blows. Diane's hand touched his arm briefly, a warning to stay silent. So you harbored resentment toward Mr. Grand? I harbored concern for my daughter's well-being. The questioning continued for another hour. Victoria painted a picture of familial obligation fulfilled, of generous gesture misunderstood. She was good. Charles had to admit that. Every answer carefully crafted, every emotion precisely calibrated. Then it was Charles's turn. Hutchins approached like a shark sensing blood. Mr. Grand, you're a graphic designer by training? I was. I work warehouse jobs now. Why the career change? I left design school to care for my wife during her illness. Afterward, I needed stable income to support my daughter. Stable income. Hutchins repeated the words as if they were suspect. Yet you struggle financially. Eviction notices. Unpaid bills. Desperation that might motivate someone to exploit a valuable discovery? I didn't know about the paintings when I accepted the deed. So you claim, but you have design training, artistic knowledge. Convenient that you just happened to discover millions in artwork behind those walls. Diane stood. Mr. Hutchins is testifying rather than questioning. I'll rephrase. Mr. Grand, when did you first become aware of the cabin's contents? Charles described the discovery. The damaged wall panel, Tommy's presence, the wrapped paintings. His voice stayed level despite the implied accusations. And you immediately recognized their potential value? I recognized quality. I didn't know what I had until Dr. Foster authenticated them. Hutchins pulled out photographs, the ones from the anonymous envelope. Charles's stomach clenched. Do you recognize these images, Mr. Grand? They appear to show Henry Blackwell with my late wife when she was young. Where did you obtain them? They were sent to me anonymously. How convenient. Hutchins's smile was cold. Evidence that supports your narrative, appearing from nowhere just before this deposition. I didn't. Did you know Henry Blackwell personally? No. He died before I met Sarah. Yet you claim he intended for you to have these paintings. I claim the deed legally transferred all contents to me. Whatever Henry's intentions, the law is clear. Hutchins leaned forward. The law also addresses fraud, Mr. Grand. Taking advantage of an elderly woman's grief. Accepting property under false pretenses. Objection. Diane's voice was sharp. Mrs. Blackwell is 73 and in full possession of her faculties. Characterizing her as an elderly woman incapable of understanding a property transfer is insulting to your own client. Several Blackwell attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's expression hardened. The questioning continued, each question designed to paint Charles as calculating and opportunistic. But Diane countered systematically, establishing timeline evidence that Charles couldn't have known about the paintings, showing the deed's clear language. Then came the critical moment. Mr. Blackwell. Diane addressed James directly. You were present when your mother transferred the cabin to Mr. Grand. Describe the circumstances. James's discomfort was visible. It was a family gathering. Mother presented the deed as fulfillment of family obligations. Was there laughter? James hesitated. Some family members found the property's assessed value amusing. $1, correct? Yes. Did anyone suggest the cabin might contain valuable items? No. Did your mother indicate she was withholding anything from the transfer? James's voice dropped. No. So to your knowledge, the transfer was complete and unconditional. James glanced at Victoria. Her expression was ice. I suppose so, yes. Victoria's hand tightened on the table. That small crack in testimony, James's hesitation, his admission, shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Diane pressed forward. Mr. Blackwell, were you aware your great-uncle Henry maintained a relationship with your sister Sarah? I knew they exchanged letters occasionally. Did your mother know about this correspondence? Another hesitation. She discouraged it. Why? Mother felt Henry was a bad influence, that he encouraged Sarah to reject family values. What values specifically? James's composure was crumbling. The importance of wealth, social position. Henry believed in other priorities, such as art, beauty for its own sake, integrity over profit. James's voice carried an edge of bitterness. He thought our family had lost its way. Victoria stood abruptly. This is irrelevant to the property dispute. But the damage was done. James's testimony had established Henry's character. A man estranged from family values, who might indeed hide artwork to keep it from Victoria's control. The deposition ended in tense silence. As the Blackwell team gathered their materials, Diane presented the photographs. For the record, these images show Henry Blackwell with Sarah Grand at the Montana property. They establish a relationship your mother claimed didn't exist. Victoria's reaction was swift. Her eyes widened before she could control her expression. She'd known. known about Sarah's visits, known about Henry's affection for his great-niece. Where did you get those? Victoria's voice was steel. They were provided anonymously, but their authenticity isn't in question. As the Blackwells left, James paused near Charles. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For all of it. Victoria's voice cut through. James, now. He followed her like a scolded child. Diane packed her briefcase efficiently. That went better than expected. James's hesitation damages their case significantly. And your mother-in-law's reaction to those photos, she knew about Sarah and Henry. Which means she knew Henry might have left provisions for Sarah that she suppressed. What happens now? Now we dig into probate records. Find out what else Victoria has been hiding. Diane's smile was grim. The Blackwells think they can overwhelm us with resources. But they've made a critical mistake. What's that? They've underestimated how much someone will fight when they have nothing left to lose. Charles thought about Emma waiting at home, about Sarah's journal entries, about Henry Blackwell, who'd hidden beauty from those who'd only see its price. What if we lose? Diane met his eyes. Then we lose. But we'll make them work for it. And sometimes, Mr. Grand, making the powerful work for their victories is a victory itself. Outside, Seattle rain had started. Charles watched the Blackwell's car pull away, Victoria's silhouette rigid with fury. The battle had begun in earnest. And for the first time, Charles believed he might actually have a chance. The diner was 40 miles outside Seattle, the kind of place where nobody would recognize either of them. James had chosen it carefully, neutral ground, away from Victoria's reach. Charles arrived first, taking a booth near the back. His coffee had gone cold by the time James walked through the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Thank you for coming. James slid into the opposite seat, his expensive suit seeming out of place among the worn vinyl and faded formica. I wasn't sure you would. You said it was about Sarah. Charles kept his voice neutral. That's the only reason I'm here. James nodded, ordered coffee he didn't drink. For a long moment, he just stared at his hands. Hands that had never known manual labor, that had signed documents in the family business without question. Uncle Henry wasn't crazy, James said finally. Mother wanted everyone to think he was eccentric, unreliable, but he was the sanest person in our family. Why are you telling me this? Because Sarah loved him, because he loved her, and because Mother destroyed his will. Charles went very still. Explain. James's story came out in fragments, punctuated by long pauses. Henry Blackwell had refused to participate in the real estate deals that built the family fortune. Deals that involved displacing low-income families, manipulating zoning laws, exploiting legal loopholes. He called it legalized theft. The family cut him off financially. He didn't care. He had the cabin, his art collection, and his principles. James's laugh was bitter. Mother said he was wasting his inheritance on sentiment. When Sarah was young, she'd spent summers at the cabin before Victoria discovered it. Mother was furious, said Henry was poisoning Sarah against family values. She forbade all contact. But Sarah had maintained secret correspondence with Henry until his death 5 years ago. Letters discussing art, philosophy, and her marriage to Charles. Henry approved of you. James met Charles's eyes, told Sarah that anyone who valued her over her money was worth knowing, that you understood what the rest of us didn't, that some things can't be bought. Victoria suppressed his will. Henry left specific provisions. The cabin was to go to Sarah. He'd written that he hoped it would become a home for love, not greed. That his art collection should belong to someone who'd appreciate beauty rather than price. James's hands shook slightly. Mother argued in probate that Sarah had no relationship with Henry, that the correspondence was minimal. She manipulated records, pressured witnesses. The will was contested and buried. Why didn't you speak up? I was afraid. The admission came out raw. Afraid of being disinherited. Afraid of Mother's fury. I convinced myself it didn't matter, that Sarah had you and didn't need the inheritance. His voice cracked. I was wrong. About everything. Charles absorbed this, anger warring with something else. Understanding, maybe. James had been trapped differently than Charles, but trapped nonetheless. There's more. James pulled out an envelope. Eleanor Blackwell, mother's aunt, Henry's sister. She's 87, in assisted living in California. She saw the news coverage about the paintings. She wants to talk to your lawyer. Why? Because she has Henry's letters. Original correspondence where he explicitly states his intentions for the collection. Where he mentions Sarah specifically and you by extension. James pushed the envelope across the table. Eleanor's been waiting years for someone to challenge Mother. She's ready to testify. Inside the envelope were contact details and copies of letters in Henry's handwriting. Charles's vision blurred as he read. Victoria has lost sight of what matters. She sees the world in terms of acquisitions rather than appreciation. My collection shouldn't feed that hunger. I hope Sarah understands. True wealth is the capacity to see beauty without needing to own it. If she has found someone who shares that understanding, then my art has found its proper home. Another letter, dated months before Henry's death. Sarah writes that she's happy despite her family's disapproval, that her husband works with his hands and sees the world through an artist's eyes. I find myself hoping the cabin becomes theirs someday, that my collection might protect them from Victoria's particular brand of cruelty. Some legacies should skip a generation. Charles's hands trembled. He knew. He intended. For you to have it. Yes. James's expression was anguished. I'm testifying, Charles. Everything I know about the suppressed will, about Mother's manipulation. I'm done being complicit. She'll disinherit you. I know. James's laugh was hollow. Maybe I should have been brave like Sarah. Maybe I should have chosen integrity over inheritance years ago. They sat in silence. Two men bound by a woman they'd both failed in different ways. Sarah used to say you were better than you let yourself be, Charles said finally. That you were trapped. She was generous. I was weak. James stood, leaving cash for the coffee neither had drunk. Eleanor's expecting your lawyer's call. She has documents Mother doesn't know exist. Letters. Probate records Henry kept copies of. Evidence of everything. As James reached the door, Charles called out. Why now? Why help me now? James turned, and for a moment, Charles saw genuine grief beneath the polished exterior. Because watching Mother lie under oath, blame you for Sarah's death, try to steal what Henry wanted you to have. His voice broke. I realized I've spent my life being afraid of the wrong things. Being disinherited is nothing compared to being the kind of person who'd let this happen. He left, and Charles sat alone with Henry's letters, with proof that someone in the Blackwell family had seen worth in him. That evening, Diane called Eleanor Blackwell. The conversation lasted 2 hours. When she called Charles afterward, her voice carried barely suppressed excitement. Eleanor has everything. Letters documenting Henry's intentions. Proof Victoria manipulated probate. Records of Sarah's relationship with Henry that Victoria claimed didn't exist. Will she testify? She'll fly herself here if she has to. She's been waiting for this chance since Henry died. Diane paused. Charles, this changes everything. We're not just defending your ownership anymore. We're exposing systematic fraud in the probate process. What does that mean? It means Victoria Blackwell is about to learn that money can't buy its way out of accountability. Not this time. Outside Charles's apartment, rain fell softly. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, unaware that her father's battle had just gained a powerful ally. Charles reread Henry's letters. These words from a man he'd never met, but who'd somehow seen him clearly across distance and death. True wealth is the capacity to see beauty without needing to own it. Tomorrow, they'd file motions with Eleanor's evidence. Tomorrow, the battle would intensify. But tonight, Charles felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope backed by justice. And the knowledge that Sarah's great-uncle had left him something more valuable than paintings. Proof that integrity existed somewhere in the Blackwell bloodline, even if Victoria had tried to bury it. The settlement offer arrived by courier at 6 a.m. $5 million. Cash. Immediate. All Charles had to do was sign away his claim to the paintings and agree never to contact the Blackwell family again. Charles stared at the number until it stopped meaning anything. $5 million. More money than his parents had earned in their combined lifetimes. Enough to secure Emma's future completely: college, graduate school, a house, everything. No more warehouse shifts. No more eviction notices. No more choosing between groceries and electricity. You should take it. Becca had arrived within an hour of his call, still in scrubs from her night shift. Charles, I know you want justice, but $5 million is life-changing money. Think about Emma. I am thinking about Emma. Then think clearly. You could lose this case. Victoria has unlimited resources. Even if you win, appeals could drag on for years. Meanwhile, you're hemorrhaging legal fees, living in limbo, Emma watching you stress yourself to death. Becca's voice softened. Take the money. Give your daughter security. That's what matters. Diane had driven up from Montana, her position characteristically blunt. It's a generous offer because they're scared. Eleanor's testimony threatens to expose Victoria's probate fraud. James' flipping undermines their entire narrative. They want this gone before it damages the family reputation further. So we're winning. We have a strong case. But nothing's guaranteed in court. Judges are human. Juries are unpredictable. The Blackwells could still prevail on appeal even if we win initially. Diane studied him. $5 million is a bird in hand, Charles. It's not nothing. But it felt like nothing. It felt like validation of everything Victoria believed, that everyone had a price, that working-class people could be bought off, that integrity was negotiable. Emma appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Daddy? Why is everyone here so early? Charles lifted her onto his lap. She was getting heavier, growing too fast, like Sarah said she would. We have a big decision to make, sweetheart. About the paintings. About what matters most. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked with the devastating clarity only children possess. Would Mommy want us to be rich or to be right? The question hung in the morning air. Becca looked away. Diane's expression remained neutral. Charles thought about Sarah's journal entries, about Henry's belief that some things must be protected from the marketplace, about the promise he'd made at Sarah's hospital bed, never to let the Blackwells make him feel small. Call them, Charles said to Diane. Tell them no. Charles, Becca started. I'm not taking their money. This isn't about paintings anymore. It's about whether wealthy families can suppress wills, manipulate probate, and buy their way out of accountability. His voice steadied. Henry wanted his art to go to someone who'd value it properly. Sarah believed in standing up to her family. If I take this settlement, I'm saying they were wrong, that everything does have a price. You could lose everything, Becca said. I've already lost everything that mattered. What's left is just money. Charles looked at Emma. But what I can still protect is teaching my daughter that doing right matters more than doing well. Diane nodded slowly. I'll make the call. When Victoria received the rejection, the response was immediate. A press conference. A media blitz. A promise to pursue this matter to the fullest extent of the law. But Charles felt something unexpected as he watched her fury on the news. Peace. He'd chosen principle over convenience. Fear over safety. And somehow that felt like the first real choice he'd made since Sarah died. Emma hugged him tightly. I'm proud of you, Daddy. Even if we lose? Even then. The trial date was set. Both sides prepared their final arguments. And Charles Grand, who'd been given a cabin worth $1 as a joke, prepared to fight for something worth infinitely more than money. His dignity, his integrity, and the right to honor the memory of two people who'd believed some things were beyond price. The judge's gavel fell with finality. In the matter of Blackwell versus Grand, this court finds in favor of the defendant. The property deed clearly transferred all structures and contents. Mr. Grand's ownership is legally sound. Charles exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. Beside him, Diane allowed herself a small smile. Behind them, Becca squeezed his shoulder. Across the courtroom, Victoria sat frozen, her composure finally cracking. James wouldn't meet her eyes. The trial had lasted 3 days. Eleanor's testimony had been devastating. Frail but sharp, she'd methodically dismantled Victoria's lies. Tommy had provided character testimony. Foster had authenticated the collection's provenance. And James had told the truth about the suppressed will. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. $18 million worth of paintings legally belonged to Charles Grand. But Charles had already decided what mattered most. He sold most of the collection through Foster's auction house. One painting went to a Montana museum in Henry Blackwell's name. Another he kept for Emma. A landscape of mountains at sunset, beauty preserved. The money transformed their practical reality. Trust fund for Emma. Debts paid. Art scholarship established in Sarah's name for working-class students. And surprisingly, he offered James one painting. Not for Victoria, but acknowledging his brother-in-law's ultimate courage. James accepted it tearfully, finally breaking free from his mother's control. Months later, Charles and Emma stood in the renovated cabin. Emma's easel faced the Montana wilderness, her first real art supplies scattered around her. "Mommy would like it here," Emma said softly. Charles read from Sarah's journal, her words about integrity and beauty, about Uncle Henry's belief that some legacies matter more than money. He wasn't a millionaire because of paintings. He was wealthy because he'd chosen principle over price, taught his daughter that dignity couldn't be bought, and honored the memory of two people who'd understood what the Blackwells never could. True worth isn't inherited. It's earned through the courage to stand for what's right, even when standing alone. Emma painted the landscape, continuing Henry's legacy. And Charles finally understood what Sarah had always known. They'd been rich all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.